then you would understand why I had my parents send me this book from Pakistan. Here, read. I think I was maybe 14 years old the first time I read Pride and Prejudice. Our school didn't have a fun enough library to attract many readers, but one of the teachers kept a cover with some of the most delightful, romantic, adventurous titles. All with impeccable English, though. I believe I first read Pride and Prejudice through this collection. I like to read lying down in some comfortable corner. That way I could pretend that the book was the only reality. Teachers had always talked about it, so it was just something that had to be done, had to be read. The novel seems to adjust according to your age. It's amazing. When I first read it, I think I only read what appealed to me. I completely agreed with everything Elizabeth said and all of her actions. And then I grew up and realized that even she is acting a little silly sometimes, and how in some moments there's prejudice and maybe a little immaturity in some of her thoughts and interactions. Perhaps as you grow older, you realize that life is a little more complicated, and definitely not black and white. So when you read the novel again, you see those complexities. They were there, even if you didn't notice them before. And even though your point of view might get shifted around a little bit, I think that the novel still offers you learning at every stage. The first line is one of the most famous in all of literature. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be upon his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he's considered the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters.
My dear Miss Bennet, have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last? Do you not want to know who's taken it?
You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it.
Mrs. Long says that Netherfield is taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England.
What is his name?
Bingley! Bingley!
Is he married or single?
Oh, married, my dear, to be a single, my dear, to be sure. What a fine thing for our girls.
How so? How can it affect them? I recognize that this is a story about upper-class white people. And I struggle a bit with feeling guilty that somehow their concerns are much more frivolous than the realities facing almost everyone else in the world at the time. That's something I notice with period pieces in general. We get exposed to stories involving the most affluent, who are a relatively tiny minority. And yet, I still very much enjoy them.
Oh, my dear Mr. Bennet, how can you be so tiresome? You must know that I am thinking of his marrying one of them.
Is that his design in settling here?
Design? Oh, nonsense. How can you talk so? But it is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them. Indeed, you must go and visit him as soon as he comes.
I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by yourselves, which perhaps may be better still, for you are as handsome as any of them. Mr. Bingley may like you the best of the party.
Oh, my dear, you flatter me. I certainly have had my share of beauty, but when a woman has had 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over thinking of her own beauty. Indeed, you must go and visit Mr. Bingley as soon as he comes into the neighborhood. Who? Bingley! Is Sir Williams is determined to go? You must go. It will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not.
I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent of his marrying whichever one of the girls he chooses. Though I must throw in a good word for my little Lizzie.
Oh, Lizzie is not a bit better than the others, and I am sure she is not half so handsome as Jane, nor half so good-humoured as Lydia, but you are always giving her the preference.
They have none of them much to recommend him. They are all silly and ignorant like other girls, but Lizzie has something more quickness than her sisters.
Oh, you take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion for my poor nerves.
You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends these last 20 years at least.
Mamma, we shall meet him at the assemblies. Mrs. Long promised to introduce him.
Oh, I do not believe Mrs. Long will do any such thing. She has 2 nieces of her own. She is a selfish, hypocritical woman, and I have no opinion of her.
I first read Pride and Prejudice my junior year in high school for my British literature class. I was surprised at how funny and relevant it was, even though it was old. I found it delightful and felt that Elizabeth was someone who I could easily imagine fitting in my circle of girlfriends. I remember hating Mr. Darcy as Elizabeth hated him, and falling in love with Mr. Darcy as she fell in love with him. I remember the cover of the book. It was cream colored with pink roses and a wallpaper like pattern on the front, and the title was written in gold. Or was it black? When I think about Pride and Prejudice or any of the movie adaptations, I get an almost sense of a warm feeling that I equate with nostalgia. The 7-hour adaptation with Colin Firth was the best. It was probably my first experience of something like binge watching, but it was out of necessity because it didn't exist on VHS or DVD, so I had to watch it in full. Otherwise, I missed it. What's the next goal to be?
Tomorrow fortnight.
Aye, so it is. Mrs. Strom will not be back until the day before, so it will be impossible for her to introduce him, for she will not know him herself. Oh, I am sick of Mr. Bingley.
I'm sorry to hear that. But why did you not tell me this before? If I had known as much this morning, I certainly would not have met with him. It is very unlucky, but as I have actually paid the visit, we cannot escape the acquaintance now.
Oh, my dear Mr. Bennet, what an excellent father you have, girls. Oh, my Lily, my love, though you are the youngest, I am sure that Mr. Bingley will dance with you in the next ball.
Mrs. Bennet could but see one of her daughters settled at Netherfield, and all the others equally well married, she should have nothing to wish for.
Mr. Bingley is good looking.
Gentlemen, do you know Papa?
He has a very easy and unaffected manner, and a pleasant countenance.
You are right, Sir William. And his sister has an air of decided fashion. And his friend,
Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. My favorite character is Mr. Darcy because he is inextricably Colin Firth and we have a special relationship.
Darcy, considering he's the only one I can clearly picture still.
Colin Firth diving headfirst in his knickers in the nasty Pemberley Pond.
Hot as fuck! God damn!
I always find it impossible to not have a crush on Darcy.
He's got this magnetism. Colin Firth is pretty distracting.
I love that Mr. Darcy.
Well!
Yes, Colin Firth is the best.
All the way, Darcy!
I see Colin Firth on a horse.
Darcy was just so hot and blue.
I want him to be mine.
He still is.
He's Mr. Darcy.
My favorite character is Mr. Darcy because he's inextricably
I see Colin Firth on a horse.
He's Mr. Darcy.
He's Mr. Darcy. But really? Here's what the New York Times told us on February 9th, 2017. Basically, Mr. Darcy, the dark, brooding hero of one of Jane Austen's most famous novels, Pride and Prejudice, would not have looked at all like Colin Firth. And let's be honest, even Colin Firth doesn't look like Colin Firth. Rather, the real Mr. Darcy would have been pale and pointy-chinned. He would have had a long nose on an oval, beardless face, and his hair, strangely, would have been powdered white. He would have been slightly undernourished with sloping shoulders. Hardly a steamy romantic hero, then, in modern eyes.
Like our American Mr. Bingley, I think there are great pretty women in the room. Which do you think is pretty?
Oh, the eldest Miss Bennet beyond a doubt. There cannot be two opinions on that point. Miss Bennet, may I have the honor?
What a charming amusement this is for young people, Mr. Darcy. There's nothing like dancing after all. It is the first refinement of polished society.
Certainly, sir. It also has the advantage of being in vogue amongst the less polished societies of the world, and a savage can dance.
Your friend performs delightfully, and I do not doubt that you are an adept in the silence yourself, Mr. Darcy. Do you not think this a proper compliment for the face?
It's a compliment which I never paid to any face, if I can believe.
Oh, upon my word, I've never seen so many pretty girls in my life.
You are dancing with the only handsome girl in the room.
Oh, she is the most beautiful creature I ever beheld, but her sister Elizabeth is very agreeable.
Perfectly tolerable, I dare say. Not handsome enough to tempt me. Go return to your partner and join us, else you're wasting your time with me.
I was 18 when I first read the book. I could not care less about the parties and the gossip. It was required to be in the class. Many of my female classmates had already read it and loved it. I never wanted to go back. I've only grown to hate it more. I think it perpetuates a romantic farce in which smart women are encouraged to believe that there is one man out there who will finally get them. And he's probably an asshole at first, so make sure to give assholes a second chance, because he may actually be the only man who fulfills you and gets how quirky you are. I've seen the film with Colin Firth and Keira Knightley, and Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, and even worse, Bridget Jones' Diary and Twilight. I have rarely seen a collection of people in whom there was so little beauty.
The country can in general supply but a few subjects for such a study. In a country neighborhood one moves in very confined and unvarying society.
But people themselves alter so much. There's always something new to be observed in them.
Yes, and I can assure you there is quite as much of that in the country as there is in town. I cannot see that London has any great advantage. The country is a vast deal pleasanter, but this gentleman seemed to think the country was nothing at all.
His story, Mr. Darcy, Mama. I'm sure he only meant that there was not such a variety of people to be met in the country as in town, which you must acknowledge to be true.
Well, certainly, my dear, nobody said that there were, but as you're not meeting with many people in the neighborhood, I know that there are a few neighborhoods larger. I know we dined with 4 and 20 families. Mr. Darcy is proud.
Most forbidding, disagreeable.
One cannot wonder that so very fine a young man with a family, fortune, everything in his favor should think so highly of himself. If I may so express it, he has a right to be proud.
I could quite forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. Pride is a very common failing, I believe. By all that I have ever read, I am sure it is very common indeed.
I was 14 or 15 when I first read the book. I'd just seen the movie adaptation of Mansfield Park, loved it, and thought Jane Austen was an author I really ought to be interested in. And being this awkward, nerdy outsider type, felt really cool toting this classic novel around with me. But when I first read the book, I identified with Jane as opposed to Elizabeth. I was struggling with how to be a strong woman. Boys bullied me terribly because I was this oddball who had these bizarre notions about girls being equal to boys, and I was so shy. I didn't know how to stand up for myself or express myself in a strong manner. I think there was this societally conditioned part of me that longed to just be the good girl like Jane. Sweet, loving, lovable, utterly forgiving. Nowadays, I identify more with Elizabeth. Elizabeth may jump to rash conclusions, but at least she's not afraid to stand by her ideas or own up to her mistakes. Now, I appreciate the subtlety and wit of Austen's writing far more as an adult than as a pretentious teenager. I think Elizabeth and Darcy were in the wrong time. The constrictions of that period stunted them as people. And nowadays, it drives home how tiny women's worlds were made to be. I don't think I've done very well by around that century. Pretty sure I'd be considered pure peasant stock. You do not lose much by not suiting his fancy, Eliza. He's a most disagreeable man. Not at all worth pleasing.
I believe I may safely promise you never to dance with Mr. Darcy.
possibly can. I was very much flattered by his asking me to dance a second time. I did not expect such a compliment.
That is the one difference between us. Compliments always take you by surprise, but me never. You know how seeing you about 5 times as pretty as every other woman in the room. Then I give you the time to look like many a stupid person.
Dear Lizzie. My mom is an English professor who wrote her undergrad thesis on Jane Austen, so it has always been in the air. Elizabeth was the theme of so many dinner conversations about good character, bad character, how to be dignified, how to dig in your heels, and how honestly to make fun of other people in a way that wasn't really mean. The first time I remember reading it, it was because my mother bought a vintage copy with a pink flowered fabric cover and gave it to me for my birthday. I've read it now probably 4 times, usually when I'm sick. My husband watches all the Bourne movies when he's sick, and I usually read P&P or Room with a View. Comforting, escapist, and weirdly empowering. It's all going to be okay in the end. I remember thinking that Elizabeth was a little less fiery and maybe less of a feminist than my mother had made out. Originally, Pride and Prejudice was introduced to me as very idealistic, but later I started to see the feminist problems. Elizabeth, even when rebelling, always embraces and assumes her limited role in society. But she was my favorite character the first few times. As a teenager, you just want to identify, and all Elizabeth wants is to relate, and she hates, irrationally, anyone that she does not relate to. She also doesn't mind pissing people off. Later, I loved the father. I think I was trying to figure out how to be smirky, but still be a good person. And most recently when I read it, he seemed like kind of a dick. I love the mother's sincerity and capacity for forgiveness, engagement, and delight. That seems wise in its own way. My relationship to all the other sisters feels more and more distant. Jane always seemed like a made-up person.
What think you of this man's sister? Her man is not equal to his.
Certainly not at first, but she is a very pleasing woman when you converse with her. I am much mistaken if we shall not find her a very charming neighbour.
I'm not so convinced, but as you say, Mr. Bingley is just what a young man ought to be.
My dear Mr. Bennet, we had a most excellent time, a most delightful ball. I wish you had been there. Oh, Jane was so admired. Everyone said how well she looked at Mr. Bingley, thought her quite beautiful and danced with her. And she's the only creature he asked a second time. First he stood up with Miss Lucas. Oh, I was so vexed to see him with her.
For God's sake, say no more of his partners. Oh, that he had sprained his ankle in the first dance.
His sister was a very charming woman. I have never seen anything as elegant as her dress. I dare say that the lace upon
I
her
protest against any description of fire.
Mr. Darcy is not so well worth listening to as his friend, Mr. Bingley, is he? Poor Lizzie to be only just tolerable.
Oh, I beg you would not put it into Lizzie's head to be vexed by his ill treatment. It would be quite a misfortune to be liked by him. Lizzie not handsome enough to dance with? I wish you had been there, my dear, and given him one of your set downs. I quite detest the man.
I danced with Captain Carter twice, and I danced with Mr. Lilly. Meryton is to be the militia headquarters for the whole winter.
You must be 2 of the silliest girls in the country. I have always suspected it, but now I am convinced.
I am astonished, my dear, that you should be so quick to think your own children silly. If I wish to speak slightingly on anyone's children, it should not be of my own.
If my children are silly, I must hope to always be sensible of it.
Yes, but as it is, they're all of them very clever.
I remember reading it in high school. I remember being incredibly frustrated. These characters consistently play games. People are so afraid of feelings for such a large portion of the book. As a naive high schooler, I thought, why don't these people just be honest with each other so we can just move on? Even now, as I near 30, I'm usually very direct in what I want when dating someone. Granted, I may use more tact now than I did 10 or 15 years ago. When was the last time I read the novel? Never. I've never even made it through a film adaptation. I tried to watch the Keira Knightley version. My feelings over time have changed. Maybe now as an older man who's been through more romantic situations, I might appreciate it more.
the gentlemen or to dine with the officers. Yours ever, Caroline Bingley.
With the officers! Signing up, that's very unlucky.
May I have the carriage?
No, my dear, you had to go on horseback.
Horseback!
Because it seems likely to rain, and then you must stay all night.
My dearest Lizzie, I find myself very unwell this morning, which I suppose is to be imputed to my getting well through yesterday. My kind friends will not hear of my returning to life better. They insist also on my seeing Mr. Jones.
Except for sore throat and headache, there is not much the matter with me. Yours, Jane.
Well, my dear, if your daughter does die, it will be a great comfort to know that it was all in pursuit of Mr. Bingley.
Oh, I am not afraid of her dying. People don't die of little trifling colds.
I would go and see her if I could have the carriage. The carriage is not to be had, and as I am no horsewoman, walking is my only
You
alternative.
will not be fit to be seen when you get there.
I shall be very fit to see Jane, which is all I want.
Is this a hint to me, Lizzie, to send for the horses?
No, indeed, I do not wish to avoid the war. The distance is nothing when one has a motive, only 3 miles. I shall be back by dinner.
I admire the activity of your benevolence, but in my opinion, exertion should always be proportional to what is required.
You write uncommonly fast.
You are mistaken. I write rather slowly.
How many letters you must have occasion to write in the course of a year? Letters of business, too. How odious, I should think them.
It is fortunate, then, that they fall to my lot instead of yours.
Pray, tell your sister how I long to see her.
I've already told her so once, by your desire.
I am afraid you do not like your pen. Let me mend it for you. I mend pens remarkably well.
Thank you, but I always mend my own.
Good morning.
Oh, my word.
Pardon my appearance. May I inquire after my sister?
Miss Jane Bennet slept ill, and though up, is not well enough to leave her room.
Did you walk from Longbourn, Miss Bennet?
I did.
I said.
You will want to be taken to your sister immediately.
Thank you.
She really looked almost wild. Oh, I could hardly keep my countenance. Very nonsensical to come at all. Why must she be scampering about the country because her sister has a cold? Her hair, so untidy, so blousy, and her petticoat. I hope you saw her petticoat. 6 inches deep in mud, I'm absolutely certain.
Your picture may be very exact, Caroline, but that was all lost upon me. I thought Miss Elizabeth Bennet looked remarkably well when she came into the room. Her dirty petticoat quite escaped my notice.
You observed it, Mr. Darcy, I am sure, and I'm inclined to think you would not wish to see your sister make such an exhibition.
Certainly not.
To walk 3 miles, or 4 miles, or 5 miles, or whatever it is, above her ankles in dirt, and alone, quite alone. What could she mean by it? It seems to me to show an abominable sort of conceited independence.
It shows affection for her sister, which is very pleasing.
I can guess the subject of your reverie.
I should imagine not.
You are considering how insupportable it would be to pass many evenings in this society, and indeed I am quite of your opinion.
Your conjecture is totally wrong, I assure you. My mind is more agreeably engaged. I was meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow.
I am all astonishment. How long has Miss Elizabeth Bennet been such a favourite? And pray, when am I to wish you joy?
That is exactly the question I expected you to ask. The lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love, from love to matrimony in a moment.
I have an excessive regard for Miss Jane Bennet. She is really a very sweet girl, and I wish with all my heart that she was well settled. But with such a father and mother and such low connections, I'm afraid there is no chance of it. I heard that their uncle is an attorney in Meryton, and that they have another somewhere near Cheapside. That is capital.
If they had uncles enough to fill all of Cheapside, would not make them one jot less agreeable.
But it must very materially lessen their chance of marrying men of any consideration in the world.
How is your sister, Miss Bennet? as Miss Jane Bennet is not feeling any better, I invite you, Miss Elizabeth, to stay here at Netherfield.
That is most kind, sir. I thank
Do you prefer reading to cards, Miss Bennet? That is rather singular. Miss Eliza Bennet despises cards. She's a great reader and has no pleasure in anything else. They're all miserable game-playing people.
I deserve neither such praise nor such censure. I am not a great reader, and I take pleasure in anything.
In nursing your sister, I'm sure you take great pleasure, and I hope it will soon be increased by seeing her quite well.
Thank you.
I wish my library was bigger for your benefit and to my own credit.
No, I am astonished that my father should have left so small a collection of books. What a delightful library of Pamela, Mr. Darcy.
It has been the work of many generations.
And tell me, is Miss Darcy much grown since the spring? Will she be as tall as I am?
I think she will. She's now about Miss Elizabeth Bennet's height.
How I long to see her again. I never met with anybody who delighted me so much. Such a countenance, such manners, and so extremely accomplished for her age.
It really is amazing that young ladies have the patience to be so very accomplished as they all are.
All young ladies accomplished? My dear Charles, what do you mean?
Yes, all of them. I am sure I have never heard of a young lady spoken of for the first time without being informed that she was very accomplished.
I cannot boast of knowing more than half a dozen, and the whole range of my acquaintance are really accomplished.
A woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and among languages to deserve the word. And besides all this, she must have certain something in her air, manner of walking, the tone of her voice, address, and expressions, or the word will be but half deserved.
All this she must possess, and to all this she must yet add something more substantial. The improvement of her mind by extensive reading.
I am no longer surprised at your knowing only 6 accomplished women. I rather wonder at your knowing any.
Are you so severe upon your own sex as to doubt the possibility of this?
I never saw such a woman. I never saw such capacity and taste and application and elegance as you describe united.
I know many women who answer this description. Miss Eliza Bennet, let me persuade you to take a turn down the room. I assure you it is quite refreshing after sitting for so long in one attitude. Mr. Darcy, will you join us?
I would only interfere.
What can he mean, Miss Bennet?
Our surest way of disappointing him will be to ask nothing about it.
I require an explanation of your motives, Mr. Darcy.
You either choose this method of passing the evening because you are in each other's confidence and have secret affairs to discuss, or because you are conscious that your figures appear to the greatest advantage in walking. If the first, I would be completely in the way, and if the second, I can admire much better from here.
That is shocking. How shall we punish him for such a speech?
Laugh at him.
Mr. Darcy's not to be laughed at.
The wisest and the best of men may be rendered ridiculous by a person whose first object in life is a joke.
I hope I never ridicule what is wise and good. But follies and nonsense, whims and inconsistencies do divert me, I know, and I laugh at them whenever I can.
It has been the study of my life to avoid those weaknesses which often expose a strong understanding to ridicule.
Such as vanity and pride.
Yes, vanity is a weakness indeed, but pride. Where there is a real superiority of mind, pride will always be under good regulation.
Your examination of Mr. Darcy is over, I presume. Pray, what is the result?
I am perfectly convinced by it. Mr. Darcy has no defect. He owns it himself without disguise.
No, I have made no such pretension. I have faults enough. Well, I cannot forget the follies or vices of others as soon as I ought, or their offences against myself. My good opinion, once lost, is lost forever.
That is a failing indeed. But you have chosen your fault well. I really cannot laugh at it. You are safe from me, Mr. Darcy.
There is, I believe, in every disposition, a natural defect which not even the best education can overcome.
And your defect is to hate everybody.
And yours is to willfully misunderstand them.
She's great but too ill to be moved. Mr. Jones says we mustn't think of it moving her. We must trespass a little longer on your kind.
I will not hear of her removal, and I'm sure my sister will not hear of her removal.
You may depend upon it, madam, that she will receive every possible attention while she remains here with us.
You have a sweet room here, Mr. Bingley. I do not know if it's equal in the country. I hope you will not think of quitting it in a hurry.
When I'm in the country, I never wish to leave it, and when I'm in town, it is pretty much the same. They each have their advantages, and I can be equally happy in either.
Aye, that is because you have the right disposition. Thank you, Mrs. Bingley, for your kindness to Jane and for troubling yourself with Lizzie.
Oh, we all feel wretched for her. Shall I call for your coat?
If Miss Jane Bennet is not decidedly better in the morning, Mr. Jones should be sent for.
Mr. Bingley! I must remind you of your promise to hold a ball here at Netherfield. It would be the most shameful thing in the world if you did not keep your promise.
I promise to keep my engagement, and when your sister is better, you shall name the very day of the ball. But you should not wish to be dancing when your sister is not well.
Oh, yes, it would be much better to make
And by that time, perhaps Captain Carter will be back from town.
Let me see you to your coach.
Thank you, Mr. Bingley. Good day to you all.
Once again.
I hope you will give your mother-in-law due hints to this desirable event takes place as to the advantage of holding her tongue.
Have you anything else to propose for our domestic felicity?
Oh, yes. Do let the portraits of your aunt and uncle Ruth be placed in the gallery in Pemberley. Put them next to your great uncle the judge. They're the same profession, you know, only in different lines. As for your Elizabeth's picture, however, you must not have it taken. For what painter could do justice to those beautiful eyes?
It would not be easy indeed to catch their expression. But the colour, shape, and the eyelashes, so remarkably fine, might be copied.
Several of the officers have dined lately with Uncle Phillips.
And private was formed. Does anybody know why?
Probably for flirting with Lydia.
I shall walk to Meryton to hear more about it, and to find out when Mr. Denny comes back from town.
I'm glad you have come back home, Jane and Lizzie. The evening conversation had lost much of its animation and almost all its sense by your absence. Well, my dear, I hope you have ordered a good dinner today, for I have reason to expect an addition to our family party.
What do you mean, my dear?
The person of whom I speak is a stranger and a gentleman.
Colonel Wilson, Captain Carter?
No, I know Captain Denny. Who, or a new recruit?
Oh, it is Mr. Bingley, I am sure. Lydia, my love, ring the bell. I must speak to the cook kitchen.
It is not Mr. Bingley. It is someone whom I've never seen in the whole course of my life. About a month ago, I received this letter. It is from my cousin, Mr. Collins, who, when I am dead, may turn you all out of this house as soon as he pleases.
Oh, pray, I do not want to hear that mentioned. Pray do not speak of that odious man. I do think it is the hardest thing in the world that your estate should be entailed away from your own daughters, and I am sure if it had been me, I should have done something or other about it by now.
Mother, I have tried to explain to you the nature of an entail. I know it seems unfair to take an estate away from a family of 5 daughters in favor of a man who nobody cares anything about, but father cannot do anything about it.
It certainly is a most iniquitous affair. But listen to this letter. Perhaps you may be softened a little by his manner of expressing himself. Mary?
Hunsford, near Westerham, Kent, 15th October. My dear sir, the disagreement subsisting between yourself and my late honoured father always gave me much uneasiness.
Since I have had the misfortune to lose him, I have frequently wished to heal the breach. Having received ordination at Easter, I have been so fortunate to be distinguished by the patronage of the Right Honourable Lady Catherine de Bourgh, whose bounty and beneficence has preferred me to the valuable rectorate of this parish. As a clergyman, I feel it my duty to promote and establish the blessing of peace in all families, and it is on these grounds I flatter myself that my present overtures will not lead you to reject the offered olive branch.
I remain respectful compliments to your wife and daughters, your faithful friend, Mr. William Collins. In point of composition, the letter is not defective, though there is something very ominous in the style.
I think what held me back from reading it was the language. I was intimidated by the fancy writing.
If he is disposed to make the girls any amends, I shall not be the person to discourage him.
Mr. Bennet's property consisted in an estate of £2,000 a year, which was entailed after his death in favor of the male heir.
Mrs. Bennet, may I compliment you on having such a fine family of daughters. I had heard much of their beauty, but in this instance fame has fallen short of the truth. I have no doubt you will see them all disposed of in marriage in due time.
You're very kind, I am sure, and it is my dearest wish that it should be so, for else they will be destitute enough.
You allude perhaps to the entail of this estate?
Ah, sir, I do indeed.
I am very sensible, madam, of the hardships to my fair cousins, but I can assure the young ladies I come prepared to admire them. The dinner was most excellent. Which of my fair cousins is owing the excellence of its cooking?
We are perfectly well able to keep a good cook. My daughters have nothing to do in the kitchen.
Oh, I beg your pardon for having displeased you.
I am not at all offended.
You are very fortunate, it seems, in your patroness.
Ah, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. My grandmother was really fond of Jane Austen, and I wanted to read her works at her recommendation.
I think you said she was a widow, sir. Has she any family?
She has only one daughter, the heiress of Rosings. Rosings is a very extensive property.
Ah, then she is better off than many girls.
And what sort of young girl is she? Is she handsome?
She is a most charming young lady indeed. Lady Catherine herself says that in point of true beauty, Mr. Bourgh is far superior to the handsomest of her sex. For there is doubt in her features, which marks a young lady of distinguished birth. She is, unfortunately, of a sickly constitution, but is perfectly amiable. Mr. Bourgh's indifferent state of health unhappily prevents her being in town, and by that means, as I told Lady Catherine myself one day, deprives the British court of one of its brightest ornaments. Her ladyship was quite pleased with this idea. As you may imagine, I am happy on every occasion to offer those delicate little compliments which are always so acceptable to ladies.
And do these pleasing attentions proceed from the impulse of the moment, or are they the result of previous study?
They arise chiefly from what is passing at the time, and though I sometimes amuse myself by suggesting or arranging such elegant little compliments as may be adapted to ordinary occasions, I always wish to give them as unstudied an air as possible.
No one would ever think otherwise. Good night, Mr. Collins.
Mrs. Bennet, would you do me the honor? I believe the time is right for us to speak on this most pressing issue. That is, if the ladies would be so kind to excuse us for a Lady Catherine is condescending to advise me to marry as soon as possible, provided I choose with discretion. In seeking a reconciliation with the long-born family, I mean to choose one of your daughters. I have the strictest notions of seniority, and for the first evening, Miss Jane Bennet was my settled choice.
Sir, I must just caution you against choosing my eldest daughter. Jane, I must just mention, is very likely to soon be engaged.
Ah. But you see, then I only have to switch from Jane to Elizabeth. Elizabeth is next in seniority to Jane and equal in beauty.
Oh, sir, I quite agree.
Mrs. Bennet.
Oh, good evening, Mr. Collins.
Spoke to my cynical teenage heart. Now, my favorite character is probably Lady Catherine de Bourgh. She is so completely, totally, and utterly committed to her lifestyle, and everyone else can just deal with it. I hope I have that kind of confidence in my actions. Over time, I've come to love the story more and more for the girls' camaraderie, the cleverness, and the love stories that bloom slowly over time. I suppose I take Mr. Darcy in the streets and Heathcliff in the sheets. Now, my favorite character has not changed, but I fell so in love with Charlotte's pragmatism. She's so sensible. If I'd seen the movie first, I don't know if I would have read the book. But I'm glad that I did, and that's a part of my life.
What is it, Jane? An invitation for the ball at Netherfield, which has been fixed for the following Tuesday night.
Oh, goody, we shall dance with all the officers. Cultural differences, social differences, but in the internal, emotional world of women, regardless of time and place.
I think it is no sacrifice to join in evening engagements. Society is kind to us all, and I believe occasional merriment is beneficial for everybody.
I am by no means of the opinion that a ball of this kind, given by a young man of character, can have any evil tendency, and I, for one, hope to be honoured by the hands of all my fair cousins throughout the course of the evening. And I would like to take this opportunity to solicit yours, Miss Elizabeth, for the two first dances especially, a preference which I trust my cousin Jane will attribute to the right cause and not to any disrespect for her.
Not at all, sir. Oh, Mr. Collins, I heard Mary troubling herself over a particular passage from Fordyce's sermons the other day. Perhaps you might elucidate it for her.
Ah, but of course, Fordyce, a great favourite of mine, Cousin Mary. How long has Mr. Darcy been at Netherfield? Do you know?
About a month.
He is a man of very large property in Derbyshire.
Yes, his estate is a very noble one. A clear 10,000 per annum. Now, you could not have come across a person more capable of giving you certain information on that than myself. For I have been connected with this family in a certain manner since my infancy. Now, you may be very surprised at such an assertion, after the very cold manner of our meeting. Are you much acquainted with Mr. Darcy?
I spent 4 days in the same house with him, and I think him very disagreeable.
I've no right to give my opinion as to his being agreeable or otherwise. I am not qualified to form one. I've known him for too long and too well to be a fair judge. It is impossible for me to be impartial.
He is not at all liked in Hertfordshire. Everybody is disgusted with his pride. You will not find him favourably spoken of by anyone.
Is he likely to be in the country much longer?
I have heard nothing of his going away. I hope your plans won't be affected by his being in the neighbourhood.
Oh, no. It is not for me to be driven away by Mr. Darcy. If he does not wish to see me, then he must go. I was brought up in the church, and I should have been in possession of a most valuable living in the church, had it pleased the gentleman's father we were speaking of a moment ago.
Good heavens, but how could that be? How could his will be so disregarded?
There was just such an informality in the terms of the request as to give me no hope from law. Any man of honour would not have doubted the intention, but Mr. Darcy chose to doubt it.
But what can have been his motive? What could induce him to behave so cruelly?
If the late Mr. Darcy liked me any less, his son might have borne with me better. But his father's uncommon attachment to me irritated him from what I believe was a very early stage in life.
I had not thought Mr. Darcy so bad as this, though I have never liked him. I never thought so very ill of him.
I do remember his boasting of the implacability of his resentments, of his having an unforgiving temper.
Almost all his actions can be traced to pride, family pride, filial pride, not to disgrace the family name or lose the influence of the Pemberley house. It's a very powerful motive. He also has brotherly pride, which, with a bit of brotherly affection, makes him a very kind and careful guardian of his sister.
And what sort of young girl is Miss Darcy?
Oh, I wish I could call her amiable, but she's so much like a brother. Very, very proud.
I am astonished at his intimacy with Mr. Bingley.
Mr. Darcy can please where he chooses. He can be a very conversible companion if he thinks it worth his while.
They have both been deceived, I dare say, in one way or other, of which we can form no idea. My dearest Lizzie, do but consider in what disgraceful light it places Mr. Darcy. Can his most intimate friends be so excessively deceived in him?
Now, I can much more understand Mr. Bingley's being imposed on by Mr. Darcy than that Mr. Wickham should invent such a history of himself as he told me. If it be not so, let Mr. Darcy contradict it.
Welcome to Netherfield!
You have to dance with boys! He is such a charming young man and so rich. It is a comfort to know how fond Miss Bingley is of Jane. She must desire the connection as much as we do. It is, moreover, such a wonderful thing for my younger girls as Jane marrying so greatly must throw in the way of other rich men.
Careful, Mamma. I believe your conversation is being overheard by Mr. Darcy.
What has Mr. Darcy prayed that I should be afraid of him? I am sure to be of him no such particular civility as to be obliged to say nothing he may not like to hear.
I would say, madam, speaking over, what advantage can you to offend him? You will never recommend yourself or Jane to his friend by so doing.
Mr. Bingley likes your sister undoubtedly, but he may never do more than like her. She does not help him on.
But she does help him on as much as the nature will allow.
Remember, Eliza, he does not know Jane's disposition as you do.
But if all is partial to man and does not endeavour to conceal, we must find out.
Jane should make the most of every half hour in which she can command his attention. Once she is secure, there will be more leisure for falling in love as much as she chooses.
Your plan is a good one, where the only question is the desire of being well married. And if I were determined to get a rich husband or any husband, I dare say I should adopt it. These are not Jane's views.
I wish Jane success with all my heart. But if she were married to him tomorrow, I should think she'd have as much chance of happiness as if she were studying his character for 12 months.
You make me laugh, Charlotte, but it is not sound. You know it is not sound, and you would never behave this way yourself.
Lydia's going to dance with him for half of the evening and me for the other.
I was told that Mr. Wickham was obliged to go to town on business and has not yet returned.
Did Mr. Bingley purposely omit an invitation to Mr. Wickham because of Mr. Darcy?
Oh no, but I'm sure that business would not have taken him away just now if he had not wished to avoid a certain gentleman here.
It is my intention, if I may be so bold, to remain close to you throughout the evening, Miss Ellie, that way.
May I have the next dance, Miss Elizabeth?
You may.
Consulting your own feelings in the present case, do you imagine that you'll gratify mine?
Both, for I've always seen a great similarity in the turn of our minds. We are each of an unsocial, taciturn disposition, and we never speak unless we expect to amaze the whole room, and have what we say handed down to posterity with all the eclat of proverb.
This can be no very striking resemblance of your own character, I'm sure. How near it may be to mine. I cannot pretend to say. You think it a faithful portrait, undoubtedly.
I must not decide my own performance. When you met us the other day, we had just been forming new acquaintance.
Mr. Wickham is blessed. Such happy manners as making sure he's making friends. Whether he is equally capable of retaining them is less certain.
He has been very alive.
may say your partner does not disgrace you, and I look forward to having the pleasure often repeated, especially when such a desirable event, my dear Eliza, shall take place.
Now, what do you know about Richard?
Sir William's interruption is maybe forget what we were talking of.
I do not think we were speaking at all. We have tried to focus on conversation without success, and what we will speak of next I cannot imagine.
What think you of books?
Books. I'm sure we never read the same books, not with the same meaning. I remember hearing you say that you hardly ever forgive, that your resentments once created were unappeasable. You are very cautious, I suppose, as to their being created.
I am. May I ask what this question tends?
Merely the illustration of your character. I'm trying to make it out.
What is your success?
I do not get on at all. I hear such varying accounts of you, puzzle me exceedingly.
I wish, Miss Bennet, it would not sketch my character at the present moment, as there is reason to fear the performance would reflect no credit on either.
But if I do not take your likeness now, I may never have another opportunity.
I would by no means suspend any pleasure of yours.
I have found out by a singular accident that there is now, in this room, a near relation of my patroness. How wonderfully these sorts of things do occur. Who would have thought of my meeting with Mr. Darcy, the nephew of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, in this assembly? Oh, I am most thankful that this discovery was made in time for me to pay my respects to him.
You are not going to introduce yourself to Mr. Darcy.
Indeed, I am. It will be in my power to assure him that his ladyship is quite well yesterday se'night. Oh, Mr. Darcy!
I see you are quite delighted with George Wickham. Your sister has been talking to me about him and asking me 1,000 questions. And I quite find that the young man forgot to tell you that he was the son of the late Mr. Darcy's steward. George Wickham has treated Mr. Darcy in the most infamous manner. I do not know the particulars, but I know that Mr. Darcy is not in the least to blame, that he cannot bear to hear George Wickham's name mentioned. I pity you, Miss Eliza, for this discovery of your favourite's guilt, but really, considering his descent, one could not expect much better.
His guilt and his descent appear by your account to be the same. I've heard you accuse him of nothing worse than being the son of Mr. Darcy's steward, and of that he informed me himself.
I beg your pardon. Excuse my interference. It was kindly meant.
Continue, Mr. Janeway.
I will take this opportunity while the musicians are resting to perform a song for the assembly. It was cold outside of Tiffany's. I was shivering in the storm. I walked in and asked the gentleman, could I please keep warm? He asked me, how come a baby doll has no cozy place to go? So I told that kindly gentleman my tale of woe. Every baby needs a dad, dad, dad.
Oh, Cousin Mary, this is our dance!
What have you learned to Mr. Wickham?
Mr. Bingley was not the but he will vouch for the good conduct of his friend, Mr. Darcy.
And Mr. Bingley does not know Mr. Wickham himself.
No, he has never seen him.
Well, as
private audience with the fair Elizabeth?
Oh dear, yes, certainly. I am sure that Lizzie will be very happy. I'm sure she can have no objection. Kitty, my dear, I want you upstairs.
Mr. Collins, you don't have to say to me that anybody else can come. I'm going away myself.
No nonsense, Lizzie. I desire you to stay. Lizzie, I insist upon you staying and listening to Mr. Collins. Oh,
You can hardly doubt the purport of my discourse. However, your natural delicacies may lead you to dissemble. My intentions have been too marked to be mistaken. Almost as soon as I entered the house, I singled you out as the companion of my future life. My reasons for marrying are, first, that I think it's a right thing for every clergyman to set the example of matrimony in his parish. Secondly, I am quite convinced that it will add very greatly to my happiness. And thirdly, which perhaps I ought to have mentioned earlier, it is the particular advice and recommendation of the very noble Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Your wit and vivacity, I think, must be acceptable to her, especially when tempered with the silence and respect which her rank will inevitably excite. As I am to inherit this estate after the death of your honoured father, I could not satisfy myself without resolving to choose a wife from among his daughters. This has been my motive, my fair cousin, and I flatter myself it will not sink me in your esteem. And now, all that remains is for me to assure you, in the most animating language, of the violence of my affection. Oh. To fortune, I am perfectly indifferent, and shall make no demand of that nature on your father, since I am well aware it could not be complied with. And now you may assure yourself that no ungenerous reproach shall ever pass my lips. When we are married.
You are too hasty, sir. You forget. I have made no reply. Let me do so now without further loss of time. Accept my thanks for the compliments you are paying me. I am sensible to the honour of your proposals, but it is impossible for me to do otherwise than decline them.
Am I now to learn that it is usual with young ladies to reject the addresses of the man they secretly mean to accept? I am by no means discouraged by what you have just said, and shall hope to lead you to the altar.
My word, sir, I am not one of these ladies. I am perfectly serious in my refusal. You cannot make me happy, and I am convinced I am the last woman in the world who can make you so. Can I speak plainer? Do not think of me as one of these elegant females intending to plague you, but as a rational creature speaking from the truth of her heart.
Jane, come down, for there is such fun here! Oh, what do you think is happening? Mr. Collins has made an offer to Lizzie, and Lizzie will not have him!
You are uniformly charming, and I am persuaded that when sanctioned by the express authority of both your excellent parents, my proposals will not fail of being accepted.
Depend upon it, Mr. Collins, that Lizzie will be brought to reason. She is a headstrong, foolish girl who does not know her own interest, but I will make her know it.
Yes, but if she is really very headstrong and foolish, I know not whether she would altogether make a desirable wife for a man of my situation.
So you quite misunderstand me. Lizzie is only headstrong in manners such as these. In everything else, she is as good-natured a girl as ever lived. Oh, Mr. Bennett, you are intimidating me! You must come and go. You must come and make Lizzie marry Mr. Collins, for she vows she will not have him. If you do not make haste, he will change his mind and he will not have her.
I have not the pleasure of understanding you. Of what are you speaking?
Of Mr. Collins and Lizzie. Lizzie says she will not marry him, and Mr. Collins begins to say that he will not have her.
And what am I to do on the occasion? It seems a helpless business.
Speak to her about it yourself. Tell her that you insist upon her marrying him.
I understand that Mr. Collins has made you an offer of marriage. Is it true?
It is true.
Very well. And this offer of marriage you have refused.
I have, sir.
Very well. We now come to the point. Your mother insists upon you accepting it. Is it not so, Mrs. Bennet?
Yes, sir, I will never see her again.
An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. From this day, you must be a stranger to one of your parents. Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do.
The whole party has left Netherfield by this time and are on the way to London, without any intention of coming back again.
It is unlucky that you are not able to see your friends before they left the country. But may we not hope that that period of future happiness and delightful intercourse that you have known as friends may be renewed with yet greater satisfaction as sisters?
Caroline decidedly says that none of the party will return into Hertfordshire this winter.
It is only evident that Miss Bingley does not wish her brother to return this winter.
Why will you think so? It must be his own doing. He is his own master. One passage from her letter particularly hurts me. Caroline expressly declares that she neither expects nor wishes me to be her sister, that she is perfectly convinced of her brother's indifference.
Miss Bingley sees that her brother is in love with you.
No one who has seen you together can doubt his affection.
Had she seen half so much loving Mr. Darcy for herself, she would have ordered her wedding clothes. No, the truth is this, that we are not rich enough or grand enough for her. Go to my aunt and uncle in London, make it known that you are there, and I'm sure he will come to you. A sensible solution.
This morning, Mr. Collins hastened to Lucas Lodge to entreat me to name the day that was to make him the happiest of men.
Charlotte, how can you tell such a story? Do you not know that Mr. Collins wants to marry Lizzie?
Engaged to Mr. Collins. My dear Charlotte, impossible.
Why should you be so surprised, my dear Eliza? Or do you think it incredible that Mr. Collins could procure the good opinion of any woman because he was not so happy as to succeed with you? I am not romantic, you know. I never was. I offer only a comfortable home. And considering Mr. Collins' character, connections, and situation in life, I am convinced that my chance of happiness is as fair as most people can boast upon entering the marriage state. Okay, now that I'm much older, I get so impatient with all of these characters until I remember it was a different time. Let go of my modern sensibilities.
Undoubtedly.
Mr. Collins's present circumstances makes this a most eligible match. Congratulations, Charlotte.
I rate his abilities much higher than my sister's. There's a solidarity in his reflection which has often struck me. And though he is by no means so clever as myself, maybe if you encourage him to read and improve himself, he'll make an excellent companion.
I shall rely on hearing from you very often, Eliza.
Yes, that you shall.
Will you come and see me?
I hope that we meet very often here in Hertfordshire.
I'm not likely to leave Kent for some time. Promise, therefore, to visit me in Hunsford.
I promise.
Charlotte, Jane, Mrs. Gardiner has invited you into town this winter.
Yes, I accepted Aunt Gardiner's invitation with pleasure.
Mary, tell Lizzie that her aunt has also invited her to accompany her on a tour of Derbyshire in the summer.
Mary, tell Mother I accept.
Who do you think Mr. Collins proposed to, Mother? Charlotte Lucas.
Charlotte Lucas! Oh, this is your doing, Elizabeth! Oh, I do think it's the hardest thing that Charlotte Lucas should ever be mistress of this place, that I should be forced to make way for her and live to see her take my place in it.
My dear, do not give way to such gloomy thoughts. Let us hope for better. Let us flatter ourselves that I may be the survivor.
admirer of someone else. Miss King and her sudden acquisition of £10,000.
My dearest Lizzie, the weather in London continues to be pleasant. My Aunt Gardner went into town today, and I took the opportunity to call upon Miss Bingley at Grosvenor Street. I did not think Caroline in good spirits, but she was very glad to see me and reproached me for giving her no notice of my coming to London. I was right. My last letter had never reached her. I inquired after her brother, of course. He was well, but so much engaged with Mr. Darcy that they scarcely ever saw him. I found that Miss Darcy was expected to dinner.
I wish I could see her. My visit is not long as Caroline is going out. I dare say I shall soon see her. Yours, Jane.
We know how little there is to tempt anyone to our humble abode.
Not at all.
Well, the house is rather small, but well built and convenient. And everything is arranged with neatness and consistency.
Mrs. Collins deserves all the credit.
Well, the garden is large and well laid out.
The cultivation of which I tend to myself.
To work in his garden is one of Mr. Collins' most respectable pleasures. I encourage him as much as possible.
Miss Elizabeth, you will have the honour of seeing Lady Catherine this Thursday evening. Who could have foreseen an attention such as this? And do not uneasy yourself, my fair cousin, regarding your, apparel. Lady Catherine likes to see the distinction of rank preserved. Mr. Darcy, what an honour, sir.
Mr. Darcy.
Miss Elizabeth,
You know my nephew.
I had the pleasure of meeting Miss Bennet in Hertfordshire during my stay in Netherfield. Your family is in good health, I trust.
They are, thank you. My eldest sister is currently in London. Did you happen to see her there?
Unfortunately, no.
Do you play and sing, Miss Bennet?
A little.
Sometime or other we shall be very happy to hear you. Do you draw?
No, not at all.
Suppose you had no opportunity. Your mother should have taken you into town each spring for the benefit of masters.
My mother would have no objection, but my father hates London.
Has your governess left you?
We never had governess.
No governess? Never heard of such a thing. 5 daughters brought up at home without a governess? It's quite impossible. Your mother must have been a slave to your education. Without a governess, you must have been neglected.
Compared with some families, I believe we were, but those of us who wished to learn never lacked the means. We were always encouraged to read and had all the masters necessary. Those of us who wished to be idle certainly might.
But that is what a governess will prevent. If I had known your mother, I should have encouraged her most strenuously to engage one. Are any of your younger sisters out?
Yes, Ma'am, all.
All? What, all 5 out at once? Very odd. And you only the second. The younger one's out before the elder ones are married. Are your younger sisters very young?
Yes, Ma'am, my youngest is not 16. I think it would be very hard upon younger sisters to miss out on their share of society and enjoyment because the elder ones lack the means or inclination to marry early.
You give your opinion very decidedly for so young a person. Pray, what is your age?
With 3 younger sisters grown up, your ladyship hardly expects me to own it. Mr. Darcy.
Miss Bennet.
Honestly, did not make that big of an impression on me. What are you speaking of? What are you saying to Miss Bennet? Let me hear what it is.
We were speaking of music, madam.
Of music, then pray speak louder. I must have my share of the conversation. There are few people in England, I suppose, who have a more true enjoyment of music than myself, or a better natural taste. If I had learnt, I should have been a proficient.
I believe You promised to play for us, Miss Bennet.
How does Georgiana get on, Darcy?
Georgiana plays with great proficiency.
I'm very glad to hear such a good account of her, and pray tell her from me that she cannot expect to excel if she does not practice a good deal.
I assure you, madam, she does not need such advice. She practices very constantly.
So much the better. When next I write to her, I shall charge her not to neglect it on any account. Mrs. Collins, you are welcome to come to Rosings every day and play the pianoforte in the housekeeper's room. You will be in no one's way, you know, in that part of the house.
I thank you for your kindness, Lady Catherine.
You mean to frighten me, Mr. Darcy, by coming in all this state to hear me play. I will not be alarmed, though your sister doesn't play so well. There is a stubbornness about me that cannot be frightened at the will of others.
You cannot really believe I'm trying to alarm. I've had the pleasure of your acquaintance long enough to know that you find great enjoyment in occasionally professing opinions which, in fact, are not your own.
Oh, I am very unlucky in meeting with a person so able to expose my real character and be a part of the world where I wish to pass myself off with real credit. And I must say very important too, Mr. Darcy, for it is prompting me to retaliate, and things may come out that will shock your relations to hair.
I am not afraid of you. I was 17 or 18 when I first read the novel. I, like Lizzie, thought that Darcy was a stuck-up, pompous twit. And I couldn't conceive of him liking anyone besides himself. I just didn't see Darcy having that depth of emotion because of my own preconceived prejudices against him. Upon seeing the Colin Firth and later Matthew McFadden films, I got it. The subtlety of his character was lost on me until I saw it in person. Growing up in rural Texas, the social norm was for women to be meek and submissive. Something which baffles me to this day. Reading Lizzie's strength, spirit, passion, and independence was fabulous. She defied the culture of her time and defied the culture I was being raised in. She defined, for me, what I began to look for in a partner, and eventually found. Sense and Sensibility is still my favorite. As my introduction to Austen, but I understand something new about Pride and Prejudice every single time I read it. Of course, Mrs. Bennet is always hilarious. Bingley is great fun. Mr. Collins is deliciously satirical. Lady Catherine, just the heinous bitch. But I have to say my current favorite character is Mr. Bennet. The gentleness and patience with which he approaches the world and his family are beautiful. He's a true role model. My feelings about the novel have changed so much. It really is a different genre every single time I read a book. Rom-com, feminist manifesto, satire of the class system, romantic tragedy, commentary on the stupidity of being young. Commentary on the bitterness of age. It's a novel that truly reflects back the story you most need to hear at the time that you are reading it.
Pray, let me hear what you have to accuse him of. I should like to know how my nephew behaves among strangers.
Prepare yourself for something very shocking. The first time of my ever seeing Mr. Darcy in Hertfordshire was at a ball, and what do you think? He only danced 4 dances, though gentlemen were scarce, and more than one lady was sitting down in want of a partner.
And not at that time you were not knowing any lady in the assembly beyond their party.
True, and nobody could ever be introduced in a ballroom.
Perhaps I should have judged better had I sought an introduction, but I'm ill qualified to recommend myself to strangers.
Why is a man of sense and education ill-qualified to recommend himself to strangers? Would you not give yourself the trouble?
I certainly have not that talent which some people possess of conversing easily with those I've never seen before.
My fingers cannot move over this instrument in a masterly manner, but then I've always supposed it to be my own fault, because I would not take the trouble of practicing.
My dearest Lizzie, 4 weeks have passed away, and I have seen nothing of him. I do not regret it, but I can no longer be blind to his fingers and attention.
Thank you again for the invitation to tea, Lady Catherine.
I suppose I must make myself used to the company of only yourselves, as my nephew leaves Kent on Saturday. Though he may put it off again, he arranges the business just as he pleases.
I wonder he does not marry, to settle and regulate his travels.
As for marriage, it is my dearest wish that Rosings and Pemberley be united in marriage.
Mr. Bird! Or Miss Bingley? Oh, Miss Darcy is a very great favourite of a lady of our acquaintance, Miss Bingley. I believe I heard you say that you know them.
I know them a little. The brother is a pleasant, gentlemanlike man. He is a great friend of Darcy's, I am to understand. I believe Mr. Bingley to be very much indebted to him. Darcy congratulated himself on having recently saved a friend from a most imprudent marriage.
Did Mr. Darcy give you reasons for his interference?
I believe there were very strong objections against the lady.
I do not see what right Mr. Darcy had to decide on the propriety of his friend's inclination, or to determine and direct the manner in which his friend was to be happy.
But as we know none of the particulars, it is not fair to condemn him. It is not to be supposed there was much affection in the case.
Yes, and if there were, it would lessen the honour of my cousin's triumph very greatly.
Thank you for the tea, Lady Catherine.
Are you unwell?
A sudden headache. Please excuse us. To Jane herself, there could be no objection, nor could anything be urged against my father, who, with some peculiarities, has abilities Mr. Darcy will not disdain, and a respectability he probably will never reach. My dearest Lizzie, I confess myself to have been entirely deceived in Miss Bingley's regard for me. Caroline did not return my visit till yesterday, and not a note, not a line did I receive in the meantime. When she did come, it was very evident there was no pleasure in it. She made a slight, formal apology for not calling before, said not a word of wishing to see me again, and was in every respect so altered a creature that when she went away, I was perfectly resolved to continue the acquaintance no longer. Her brother knows of my being in town, I am certain, from something she said herself. If I were not afraid of judging harshly, I should almost be tempted to say that there is a strong appearance of duplicity in all this. Let me hear from you very soon. Yours, Jane.
In vain I have struggled. It will not do, my feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. In spite of all my endeavours, I have found it impossible to conquer my feelings for you. I have had the highest regard for you almost from the first moment. In declaring my feelings for you, I am going against the wishes of my family, my friends, and my own better judgment. The situation with your mother's family, though objectionable, is nothing in comparison to the total want of propriety so frequently, so almost uniformly betrayed by herself, by your 3 younger sisters, and occasionally even by your father. I know your family is inferior. Our social situations are vastly different, and when aware of family obstacles, they've long opposed my inclination to you. I am so much in love as to wish to marry you in spite of all my objections. I hope that now I will be rewarded by your acceptance of my hand. Please consent to be my wife.
I have never desired your good opinion, and you certainly have bestowed it most unwillingly. I am sorry to have occasioned pain to anyone.
And this is all the reply I am to have the honour of expecting. But I might perhaps wish to know why, with so little endeavour and civility, I am thus rejected.
I might as well inquire why with so evident a desire of offending and insulting me, you chose to tell me that you liked me, against your will, against your reason, indeed against your character. Do you think anything could tempt me to accept the hand of the man who has been the means of ruining, perhaps forever, the happiness of a most beloved sister? You have been the principal, if not the only means of dividing them. Can you deny that you have done it?
I have no wish to deny that I did everything in my power to separate my friend from your sister, or that I rejoice in my success. Towards him I have been kinder than towards myself.
But it is not merely this affair on which my dislike of you is founded. Your character was unfolded to me many months ago in a recital by Mr. Wickham. On that subject, what can you ever say? In what imaginary act of friendship can you defend yourself?
And this is your opinion of me. This is the estimation with which you hold me. My faults, according to this calculation, are heavy indeed. But perhaps these offences might have been overlooked had not your pride been hurt by my honest confession of the scruples which so long prevented my forming any serious design. Could you expect me to rejoice in the inferiority of your connections? To congratulate myself on the hope of relations whose condition in life is so decidedly beneath my own?
You could not have made the offer of your hand in any possible way to tempt me. I had not known you a month before I felt you were the last man in the world who could be prevailed upon to marry.
It's quite enough, madam. I comprehend your feelings perfectly, and am only to be ashamed of what my own have been. Forgive me for having wasted so much of your time. Accept my best wishes for your health and happiness. I remember being very confused by Mr. Darcy's proposal to Elizabeth, and thinking, I thought they didn't like each other.